Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar. Very excited to have our guest speaker for this evening, and thank you very much for joining us again. My name is Dr. Eric Branscombe. I'm the chair of the music department at Austin Peay State University. Also joining us, I'd like to thank Dr. Janice Cruz, who is the director of the Center of Excellence for the Creative Arts at Austin Peay State University. Thank you to the Center of Excellence for supporting this event and supporting this event financially. In today's sessions, I'd like to share that you can post questions at any time in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Only the panelists will be able to see your questions and will read it aloud when it is time. Also, you cannot see how many people are on board right now. We have a little over 20 participants from all across the state and including some in neighboring states. So thank you for joining us. Our speaker for this evening is Dr. Adia Winfrey. She is a specialist in hip-hop music and culture and the use of hip-hop as a therapeutic approach to social justice. She is the founder of the education initiative H.Y.P.E, which stands for Healing Young People Through Empowerment, and she is a highly sought-after speaker on issues of music and diversity. In 2020, Dr. Winfrey ran for Congress and made history as the first Black female congressional nominee in Alabama's 3rd Congressional District. Her campaign received national attention for her use of hip-hop culture as a tool of political mobilization. In this evening's session, Dr. Winfrey explains the hip-hop empowerment model, which is the foundation of the H.Y.P.E hip-hop therapy curriculum. We'll explore the elements of hip-hop from its history to its culture to the Hip-Hop Declaration of Peace, and then discuss the tenets of the hip-hop empowerment model with examples of how it can be integrated into teaching. And again, after the end of the presentation, we will focus more time then on the question and answer session. But in the meantime, thank you again for joining us, Dr. Winfrey.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Adia Winfrey, and I am the founder, author, creator of H.Y.P.E, Healing Young People Through Empowerment. It is a curriculum that has grown and evolved over the years, but it really started as my doctoral dissertation. My connection to hip hop culture has been a lifelong connection and really was fostered through my love of the music, but also my life experiences. And I'll be sharing more about that as we move forward. Today, or this evening, I'm going to begin our presentation by presenting a monologue that explores the origins of hip hop culture and how hip hop culture has really been a tool and a voice for people who have been disenfranchised, and how this power of the culture can be utilized by educators, mental health professionals, really anybody who is working with young people or just people who are looking for their voices to be heard. So I am going to share my screen. And again, this presentation is going to take us through the evolution of hip hop culture, understanding really what the culture is all about beyond what many people think of, which is rap music, which I love, near and dear to my heart. But there are so many elements to hip hop. And when you're working with young people and you're using the culture as a tool of engagement, you as an educator or you as a facilitator want to be very clear on what the culture is. Our independent collective consciousness. This is how the Hip Hop Declaration of Peace describes hip hop. Founded and orchestrated by the Temple of Hip Hop, the Hip Hop Declaration of Peace was presented to the United Nations on May 16th, 2001. And this document lays out the 9 elements of hip hop. And it also gives a good foundation on how those within the culture should conduct themselves, build communities. It talks about what these original 4 elements were and are: the breaking element, the emceeing or rapping element, street fashion and street entrepreneurialism, street language, graph writing, beatboxing, all of these various elements came together just organically. And so this is hip hop culture as we know it today. But when we think about hip hop as we know it today, it's not just an American thing, it's a global phenomenon. And this is what the architects of the culture understood in 2001. But how did we get to this? Where did this culture originate from? Where did hip hop come from? How did it come to be? And to really understand how hip hop came to be, we have to go back to the continent of Africa. Yes, this is the origin of hip hop culture and those elements that are mentioned in the Hip Hop Declaration of Peace. When you think about hip hop culture and the element of street fashion, the fashion within a culture makes a statement. The fashion within the culture tells a story. And from the bright, bold colors to the patterns that we see within hip hop, the ability for people to make a statement using clothing, footwear, jewelry, these things take us back to the continent of Africa. When we think about those artists, especially in the 80s, who embodied Afrocentrism and really connected to the culture, we see it more clearly that there's a direct connection to hip hop culture and the continent of Africa when we think about the street fashion element of hip hop. But it doesn't stop with just the fashion. When we think about hip hop culture and we think about the dancing, the moves, the break dancing, the connecting and using your body to tell a story, this goes directly back to the continent of Africa. When we think about hip hop culture, we think about the beat, we think about the rhythm, we think about the producer, we think about the person creating these sounds. Back in my day, older people used to call it that badoop badoop music because that's all they heard was the bass. But this is directly connected to that talking drum, where the DJ becomes the orchestrator of the music and the sound. But it goes beyond just the producer and it goes to the graph writer, the writing on walls. When we think about the continent of Africa, we think about Egypt, when we think about the hieroglyphs and hip hop culture and the graph writers within the culture can be linked back to those hieroglyphics in Egypt on the continent of Africa. But how did hip hop culture go from being the elements, go from being on the continent of Africa to where we are today? That was the experience of the transatlantic slave trade. Now, during this period, during the transatlantic slave trade, the enslaved Africans, when they were put on these ships, it was done with the intention of removing culture, removing, stripping language, stripping identity, stripping what was on the continent, erasing that to bring these individuals to a new continent, to a new land, and used and abused. It wasn't intended that these things would continue on, these foundational elements, but thankfully they did. And the element of music having multiple purposes, not just something done for entertainment, but something for communication, a tool of wellness, a tool of being able to thrive and survive in the most terrible conditions that we can't even imagine. But that is how those elements continued on. And not even just the music and the street language element of it, but also that fashion element still found its way to continue because the fashion of that day were quilts. And the quilts were not just something that were used as covers or blankets, they were actually used as maps and continued to be an additional way to communicate, actually being used through the Underground Railroad as tools of liberation. When we think about Harriet Tubman and even those hundreds of conductors on the Underground Railroad whose names we will never know, they use street language, they use the music, they use the fashion as a way to liberate and to free those who were enslaved. And through hundreds of years of fighting, hundreds of years of believing. And finally, the Emancipation Proclamation, which came after many enslaved and runaway enslaved Africans joined in the fight in the Civil War, Black Americans in this country found their liberation. And those elements took on a new form. In freedom, the music still played a part. It was still a way for people to engage and thrive and have fun and tell stories. It still became a key piece of Black American culture. When we think about jazz and the blues and even country music having its origins in Black culture, rock and roll, the power of gospel music throughout the course of these times, music was instrumental. When we think about what life was like, even in the decades after slavery, these factors still remained important. Moving on, in the decades, music changed and sounds changed. But again, no matter what the genre was, music had a message. Music told a story. And this is how hip hop evolved and continued to evolve, these various elements. But when we think about hip hop as we know it today, when we think about that course that led to all these changes and where it started from and where it is now, there is one additional ingredient that was added that really played a major role in hip hop becoming what we know it as today. How these elements that started on the continent became what we know them as today. And that was the experience of the 1960s and the 1950s civil rights movement. Yes, it was during the civil rights movement. I've had the opportunity to speak to several foot soldiers of that time. And one thing that rings true throughout all the stories that I've heard is that music kept them going. Music gave them life. Music kept their souls uplifted. Music was a great communicator. When they were being arrested, when they were on the paddy wagon, and they were in the presence of officers, they were able to create and make up songs and do these various things to communicate and to stay safe and just to stay up spiritually. These young people all throughout the South, teenagers and college students who had the audacity to demand respect and the audacity to believe and have faith that they could see a better world. They didn't have to wait for the adults to do it. The adults were just trying to survive, but these younger people, they understood that they had value and they had autonomy and they had a voice. And it was that energy that laid the foundation for hip hop as we know it today. That audacity and that faith and that hope and that belief. And again, that understanding that the arts were more than the arts, it was a lifeline. And through the struggle, through the civil rights movement, the ups and the downs, the music continued to inspire the young people. However, tragedy struck on April the 4th, 1968, with the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And while the movement was on a particular path and, many great things had been accomplished, and the young people again were using music and this art that they created, these freedom songs, as a tool of revolution. Once Dr. King was assassinated, a lot of that hope just went away, and cities across the United States burned. And they burned because people were enraged and hurt and felt lost and really didn't see a way up. But in the South Bronx around this time, the city burned, but not for those reasons. In the South Bronx, which would on become the birthplace of hip hop, the city burned because of racism. The city burned because the building owners did not want occupants in their building that were Black and Puerto Rican. And that was pretty much who the population was at that time. So the owners of the building would rather blow up the buildings, burn the buildings to get insurance money. Now, these images that you are seeing are the South Bronx in the early 1970s. And even in all this rubble, even in this area that was known as Little Beirut at the time, young people still were able to have the audacity to dream and to hope. They carved out their own spaces to find a voice. They carved out their own way to create games called Kick the Can, or to hang out with friends, to use what they had in their immediate environment, as bad as it was, finding ways to still just have a sense of humanity. And this here is the environment that birthed hip hop. This is the environment where the seeds were planted that hip hop came out of. In the summer of 1973 at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue, a 17-year-old girl by the name of Cindy Campbell had the idea of throwing a back to school party on August 11th. And she was doing this party because she wanted to raise money for back to school clothes. She invited her brother Kool Herc to DJ the party, and the party was amazing. So many people came. She made $500 at the party, but beyond that, this party became the birthplace of hip hop, became the birth of hip hop. It was at this party where all the elements came together: B-boys and B-girls, DJs, MCs, graph writers, all came together in this one space. And it wasn't just the young people, it was the parents, the aunts, the uncles, the grandparents as well. Everybody coming together in this one space and bringing the culture full circle. You could see the fashion, you could see the elements come together in this moment. And this is what really sparked that hip hop revolution within the city of New York. Young people who were rendered voiceless by those in authority and those in power had created a culture of their own, an underground scene in the midst of chaos. But in 1979, this underground scene went national with the release of the song Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang. It took this underground culture from the Bronx throughout New York, the United States, and even took it international. With the release of this very first song, hip hop was no longer an underground scene in a borough of a city, it was an international phenomenon. And immediately from 1979 all the way up, hip hop began changing everything, changing the way people dress, changing the way people spoke. Words like chill became everyday common phrases, but they began within the culture. The music began influencing young people, those of us who grew up in the 80s and the 90s. It allowed us to make sense of our world. We were living in times that were completely different than what our parents had seen. And so we were carving out our own niche and really carving out our own way of life. And hip hop culture, in all its elements, allowed us to do that in our own way. From the words that we spoke to the clothes that we wore, the messaging and the music, just like Public Enemy's Fight the Power, gave us hope and gave us a way to feel like, despite a lot of the systemic racism that was going on at the time, kind of undercover, that we still had a voice and we still could demand freedom, even at a time when it wasn't seen as such. As laws were being passed and mandatory minimum sentencing was the law, and it was disproportionately affecting Black people. It was these young people in the 80s and 90s who were being affected by that, and hip hop became, again, like in the past, our freedom songs. They became our tool of revolution. They became a way to tell a story that was not told in the mainstream media, or if it was told in the mainstream media, it was told from a context that was derogatory or told from a context that was frowned upon. But within hip hop culture, it allowed us young people to tell our story in our own way. And before you know it, words like bling became everyday words that were used in the mainstream culture. Words like shout out, words like 24/7 began to become more mainstream. And throughout the 80s and 90s, rap just gained popularity. At the beginning of the 80s, at the beginning of the decade, it was seen as a fad. By the end of the decade, rap music and hip hop culture had really encompassed every aspect of culture. But two tragedies happened towards the end of the 90s. In 1996 and in 1997, we had the deaths of Tupac Shakur and Christopher Wallace. And many people believe that this was the end of the culture. But again, the architects of this hip hop declaration of peace understood that the culture was just going to go somewhere else. And so not only did the culture not die, not only did the culture not fall completely off, it bounced back. It bounced further than we could have ever imagined. Rap music became a multi-billion-dollar industry and became all inclusive. It encompassed so much. If you go to a concert, you would see some of everybody, all socioeconomic statuses. They thought hip hop was dead at the end of the 90s, but it kept growing. And it wasn't just the music that grew. The music grew, of course, but that wasn't the only thing. It went beyond music. These other elements helped hip hop expand. Hip hop expanded from being more of entertainment, and it expanded on to really begin affecting things like business. When we look at an artist like Dr. Dre and the fact that he revolutionized how we listen to music with Beats by Dre, or what Nas was able to do as an investor with big tech companies, hip hop became a really influential piece of business. So no, it didn't die in the 90s. It kept going, it kept growing, and really continues to be an influence in business. Shout out to Jay-Z and Beyonce. But it went beyond, and it's going beyond just business. When we look at what hip hop culture has been within academia and how hip hop culture has influenced what we do on college campuses, shout out to Austin Peay State University, and schools and universities globally. When we look at what hip hop culture has meant for wellness and emotional wellness and mental health, physical health, when we look at what it has meant for therapy in the field of psychology, hip hop did not die in the 90s, it grew and has expanded. When we look at what it means for education, our education system, and what it means as we look at the literary arts, hip hop has continued to grow and blossom and really expand. But even beyond education and beyond wellness and health and the literary arts, hip hop has influenced politics. Hip hop has gone on to play a major role in politics, starting with David Banner testifying before Congress at the beginning of the 2000s, to P. Diddy, Puffy, Sean Combs having his vote or die movement during the 2004 elections, Che Romfest Smith running for public office in the city of Chicago in 2010. We had Brad Jordan, Scarface, running for city council. Of course, you know, Killer Mike really came on board and began to actively engage within presidential elections, which opened the door for a Kanye West to actually run for president. And so hip hop has continued and continued to expand and to grow. And even beyond just politics, electoral politics as we know it, hip hop has come full circle and has been a voice within the activism circles, within this summer of rebellion, and in the decades and the years that have led up to the current movement, the current civil rights movement, and the current social justice movement that we find ourselves in now. We are in a full circle moment within hip hop culture. And you have artists like Genesis B and Jasiri X, whose full movement is based on liberation. You have artists who are advocating for justice within the criminal justice system, making major moves. And so as we think about the origins of hip hop and where hip hop is and how hip hop has been on this journey, and it's ever growing, it's not done, it's still evolving. And as we look at how it continues to evolve and we look at our path, how we've started and all the ups and downs and how we got to now, it helps us to understand that hip hop can be the light. And it is on us, those of us who understand this origin and those of us who see the connection of all these pieces, that hip hop is truly our independent collective consciousness. And with that being said, it's important again to understand the origins of hip hop and the fact that the culture was created to help people find their voice and help people truly be liberated in this world. And when we're working with young people, and particularly young people who are from disenfranchised environments, this becomes a real tool when you understand it as such. Within the hip hop empowerment model, we understand that we can pair hip hop and we can pair hip hop therapy with an elements of hip hop to different lessons. And this can be a way to engage young people by taking the various elements, whether it is emceeing or street knowledge or street language, we can pair that with various lessons that we are teaching anyway and engage youth in that way. So at this point, I am going to go to a couple of the questions that were submitted prior to tonight and answer a few of those questions. And if you have questions as we move forward in these next 30 minutes, definitely include them and we'll get to them. But I wanted to make sure I address the questions that were submitted. So one of the questions is, how can America's minority youth use hip hop to heal or to cope with social injustice like we saw across America last summer? So one way that youth can use hip hop is as a journal. If you have youth who are into writing, they might not be good writers as it relates to school or classwork, but just using writing as a form of expression, we can use hip hop for that. It doesn't have to be, something that they actually perform for other people, but just using beats that they find on YouTube. I encourage youth to find songs if there's a particular artist that they like. For example, NBA YoungBoy is an artist that a lot of the young ones like now. I tell them, look up on YouTube NBA YoungBoy type beats. So that'll give them music, beats, instrumentals that sound like the type of music that they like. And they can use that music as a background, as a soundtrack, to be able to write their own feelings and their own experiences to what they're seeing within the summer of injustice. Youth can also use the element of street language. And with all these platforms that we have now, and even platforms where they can invite other people to join. So, for example, Instagram Live. A young person can invite, or anybody can invite a friend to join them on Instagram Live and just delve into various topics and talk about it and look at it from various perspectives. Another aspect is taking songs that address the issue of injustice. One example of a great song that came out this summer is The Bigger Picture by Lil Baby. It's a song that talks in depth about specifically the issues that we saw this summer. It was released this summer, and he wrote it, it was written in the moment. So it really addresses a lot of the issues that young people are seeing. Another really good song that the young people that I've worked with connect with as it relates to injustice is the song Black Lives Matter by Day Day. And you spell his name Daedae. And again, the song is called Black Lives Matter. And he wrote that song, or it was released around 2016. And so he's speaking a lot about the various individuals who were killed by police, and it's just expressing frustration and sadness and confusion with how we got to this place in the country. So those are a few ways that that youth can use hip hop to heal and cope as it relates to the injustice that we're experiencing. Another question was, what makes hip hop different than other types of music in connection to social justice? So, again, one thing that makes hip hop very different is how hip hop came to be. It was created in those images that you saw where the Bronx was burning. In addition to that phenomenon going on in the Bronx at that time, the other phenomenon that was happening is that music and the arts were being taken out of schools, which I'm sure sounds familiar to you. That's, how it is where I am here in Alabama. Music and the arts have largely been taken out of schools. And youth at that time, they created their own music programs essentially, and they created their own arts programs. Now the city called it illegal, and arrested kids for engaging in the activities. However, the kids found an outlet to express themselves, and it was through that the elements were actually birthed. They were created as a way for kids to find their voices. The other thing that makes hip hop culture and rap music different than other genres as it relates to social justice. When we think about the other genres of music in this country that are really popular or have been popular over the decades, rock and roll, we'll start with rock and roll. The origins of rock and roll are based in Black culture. The first rock and roll artist, rock and roll, even the term, that came from Black artists. Um, but the culture, once it gained popularity, was not a Black art form anymore. Like, I'm sure when you think of rock and roll now, you're thinking of, white artists, not Black artists. Well, with hip hop culture and with rap music, even all these decades later, and it becoming a multi-billion-dollar industry, the face of rap music is still Black and largely male. And so that has influenced how it has remained connected to social justice. The culture was created almost as out of protest, really. The culture was really almost created out of protest. And then when we see how the genre shifted in the 80s, and especially around the summer of 88, and it really became a voice of protest, that still remained a reality because it was still the same people behind the music. Now, that's not to say all the music, definitely wasn't protest music, but that theme was still there. And even music that was termed gangster rap, or, music that some people would think is the opposite of protest, and maybe is even criminal in some of the things that it's saying, there is still a voice of social justice and demands for activism in such songs. Um, a great example of that is NWA and their song F the Police. At the time, the song in the late 80s, the song was looked at as being, you know, I mean, the worst of the worst. It was just, and it was, very very raw and a very real song. But when we look at it through 2021 lenses and we look at the lyrics, there was truth in what they were saying. It was raw, but there was truth in it. And there were demands for justice and calls for for racism to end in this country. So again, the fact that hip hop, unlike other genres of music, has still been largely influenced, and not even just influenced, but has still been moved by Black culture. This is why it's still very much rooted in social justice. Another question: how do you break down stereotypes as certain types of music are only for certain types of people? You know, music is universal, and the one thing about hip hop culture that is really a beautiful thing is that it is truly a global culture. Beyond the United Nations saying that we are an international culture of peace 20 years ago, beyond that, in real life, people connect to the culture all over the globe. There is a thriving hip hop scene on every continent. I've gone to hip hop parties where I couldn't understand the language. I don't speak French, but I could connect with these French artists and the people in the crowd that were rocking out because I mean the culture is universal. And I think that that's one of the powers of hip hop. It's been able to bring people together from all walks of life. Even in this country, you know, you could go to a rap concert back when outside was open and link up with every kind of person you could think of, like any demographic that you could think of that we use to divide people. It doesn't even exist at a hip hop show. It doesn't exist. You're gonna see everybody there, so you might as well throw your stereotypes out the door because though that's who's listening to rap. And when we even look at the album sales, you know, back when that was how we counted how popular a genre was, it was largely white suburban kids that were buying rap albums. So I think that hip hop, in and of itself, and the fact that it remains so popular, is a great example of why stereotypes and saying, you know, this music isn't for you, that gets thrown out the window when it comes to hip hop. Next question: different musical styles have their cultural connections, but none seem as strong or as unified as hip hop. Do you know why this may be? And again, you know, when we think about the presentation and just how hip hop evolved and how it is so rooted in just the culture of where we came from and how we got here, that definitely explains a lot. And again, the fact that 50 years later, the group that started the culture is the one that is still leading the culture makes a huge difference. Okay, and the last question that I have that I didn't already answer during the presentation, it says so many elements of hip hop have become common in other cultures and musical styles, like rapping and country music. There is some debate as to whether or not this is appropriate or if this might be considered cultural misappropriation. Um, that's a really interesting question because it is. I mean, we do see hip hop has now become very universal. I mean, when advertisers want to sell a product, they will infuse elements of hip hop culture, whether it's the nerdy dad turning his hat backwards to signify he's cool now, or you know, having an artist pop in and having this cool beat playing in the back. I mean, the culture is mainstream now. And I think that a big part of the issue of cultural appropriation, misappropriation, that becomes an issue when the origins of the culture that are being utilized are not recognized. I think it's great that country music is infusing hip hop. In actuality, country music started out as Black music, but because the origins were erased and forgotten, it is not looked at in that way anymore. So I think it's really about honoring the origins of the culture and recognizing where it came from. And the thing about that, that's not even just about cultural misappropriation, but even those within the culture. And that is part of my personal mission, is helping artists understand the origins of this culture and where it came from and what it means, and how it is so much bigger than cashing a check, and that they are a part of a bigger picture and a bigger lineage and a bigger legacy of Black American culture, but just Black liberation, or human liberation for that matter. And so when we all kind of tune in to that being the space that hip hop was created from, we can all do better with utilizing it as a tool of empowerment. Again, especially those who are in environments where you're teaching and you're looking to use hip hop as a tool to engage young people. When you approach it from that aspect, it puts you at a whole nother position of power, because you're able to give more meaning to a culture that the young people are already connecting with. You're giving validity to a culture that they already feel connected to, but now you're bringing in this extra layer that helps them see it in an even brighter light than they saw before. You know, they might have just liked it because they like the way an artist said this, or they like the way the beat sounds, or, you know, something on more of a superficial level. But when you bring in this additional knowledge and understanding, you're able to utilize the culture to teach other lessons, and to really instill other values in the youth that you're able to work with. So again, with the hip hop empowerment model, we take an element of hip hop culture, at least one element, we pair that with whatever lesson or concept you are already teaching, and then we allow the young people to process that experience by asking them questions, and you know, asking them, you know, what it was like to experience whatever the lesson was that you were saying, or what it was like to utilize, you know, this element of hip hop in that way. So were there any questions in the Q&A?
Yes, thank you very much for answering the questions so far. We do have a few questions from the Q&A. The first, a while ago, you mentioned what you called raw lyrics. We have some audience members tonight who are K through 12 teachers or elementary music teachers who are always looking for maybe rated PG or rated G examples of music that they might use in their classrooms. Could you provide some examples of where we could find great resources for that?
Absolutely. One resource that I use in situations like that often, I subscribe to a streaming service called Tidal. And with Tidal, they actually have like the clean versions of a lot of songs. But even if you just are using YouTube, you can find clean versions of songs. So if it's an issue of you know, not wanting to you know, have songs with cuss words, or having songs that the kids already listen to, but you know, have an edited version, if you search clean version of whatever that particular song is that you're looking for, you can find it. Another option that I use is if there's a certain subject that you want to maybe find a song that's touching upon. Let's say that you want a subject of family, so you can Google rap lyrics about family and see what all comes up. And then once you find the song, I always tell people to read the lyrics. So once you find the song or the lyric, or it might just even be a piece of the song, you don't always have to play the whole thing. Once you find that song, though, look for the clean version of that song and use that.
Okay. A couple follow-up questions regarding the lyrics and the actual text. A moment ago, you showed a picture of Amanda Gorman, the poet laureate, at the inauguration. And we know from your session this morning that there's a strong connection between the lyrics in hip hop and poetry. Could you speak some as to how that connection began?
So part of how that connection began is at these block parties where the DJ would be there. This is when hip hop was very much still underground. The DJ would just be playing music on a loop, and the MC would be saying things to engage the crowd, because there was no such thing as like a rap song at that time. And so going back to African culture, they would engage in something called call and response. And so the MC would, say something like, everybody say, hey, then everybody in the crowd would say, hey, we're going to have a good day. We're going to have a good day. But it was something that was easily engaging with people, short little phrases that just engage people at the party. And that just became the thing. When Sylvia Robinson experienced this, because she's the first, I guess you would say, rap label executive. She was the first person to sign a rap artist, but she, was a woman who had a history in the music industry. And she witnessed this at a party. I believe it was her nephew's birthday party. And she just seeing these kids, doing these call and responses and these little rhymes. And so that's what gave her the idea of, let's make this into a record. Like, let's create this into something. So it was very organic how it happened. But on a bigger scale, when we think about rap as music, if we just look at it, as, just another genre of music, so much of music is poetry. A lot of the different genres of music that we look at are poetry, and rap kind of falls in that line. Now, how it got to be that way is a little different than other genres of music, but that's specifically how rap came to be as we know it today.
Okay. The next question is along the same line of lyrics, and it's a little bit of a delicate question. How can people approach the use of racial slurs appropriately, or discussed and approached appropriately?
So I am thinking that you mean like using the N-word in songs, or songs that include the N-word. So my suggestion with that, well, for one, it largely, you as a facilitator or the educator, you have to be clear and have some levels of comfort and just cultural competence as it relates to that, and just clear on understanding the origins of that word, and even culturally as it relates to Black culture, how it's accepted, I guess, differently than when you're not within Black culture. But just as a general rule, I would just use clean versions of songs. So that's already beeped out. Unless maybe, the class is largely African American, or, I would really, if the class was like, mainly non-African American students, I definitely would for sure go with the clean version of the song. And if the youth want to discuss it, because maybe somebody wants to bring it up, like, why can't we say this, or why is it inappropriate for me to use this word? I think, as an educator, why not have that discussion? Why not talk about the origins of the word, and the pain and the history of the word? I think that with rap music, the interesting thing is it gives us the opportunity to talk about difficult subjects. And that's why I say, as an educator, you have to be in a place where you're able to facilitate and handle that discussion, and even clear on your knowledge and understanding of the origins of the word, and just, how it has evolved and come to be. So, I think that it opens up the door for a good discussion if you're ready to have it.
Okay, thank you. The next, we have a couple of questions that are kind of all in the same group. And it pertains all to how music just evolves over time. Historically, it was really easy to tell the difference between country music and roll music, and between rock and roll and rap. But over time, more and more of those definitions become flexible and blurred, in the word of the question. So how can we clearly define what is or is not within the umbrella of hip hop culture and music?
That is really a interesting question because it's so true. I mean, even within hip hop, it's been just a meshing together of different genres to where we have new genres within the genre, and it almost makes me think maybe the labels are gonna kind of start fading away. A big thing is about record sales or streaming, money. A lot of it revolves around that, and so when it comes to record labels and artists, whatever they think is going to sell is going to really drive what the music sounds like. But what we consider hip hop is just morphing and it's changing. There's a petition going around now where they're wanting to make a new genre of hip hop called contemporary hip hop. um I mean, it's just because I think because the genre is getting older, and as we're aging, our tastes are aging. We're still hip hop, but it's not the same hip hop that our kids are listening to. And so I would just be curious. Like, the question is really intriguing to me. I'm just curious, like, I guess as a follow-up to the question, why do we have to have categories for what hip hop is? Or why do we have to have these very concrete labels of what it is? Because so often, especially now, the lines are blurring. We think about the song Old Town Road. If you guys remember that song from last summer, it was a rap song, but then Billy Ray Cyrus was on it, so it was country, but it was hip hop. And was Little Nas X really rapping or was he singing? We think about the Roots crew. They are a full band, but they're rappers. But are they really rappers? So it's an interesting question, and it's one of those moments I wish we could dialogue a little bit more. But that's an interesting question. How do we define, what hip hop is?
Okay. Anyone listening, feel free to post your follow-up questions or responses to that. We have one more question here. When you began the presentation, you spoke a lot about the origins of hip hop culture coming from Africa. Can you help or discuss a little bit about what we should listen to from the origins? Like, I guess the question is, how did hip hop evolve? From what other musical styles or what elements of music from Africa should we listen to? Are there elements of music that were already in America that got blended with that? What was the evolution of that?
So the musical evolution, when we think about rap music and the musical evolution, um, the first step back would be disco. Then back from disco, the genre before that, if we're looking at the course of rap music, we would definitely go into rock and roll, R&B, then moving into, for sure, jazz and blues and bebop. And I guess if you were looking at maybe the oldest genre in American music that is the closest to rap as we know it today, would be more of a bebop or the blues. Um, you know, uh, Ma Rainey is someone that a lot of people look at her as one of the earlier forms of, or I guess, incarnations of what will become rap. James Brown is actually another huge influence that people look at as a direct lineage to rap music. Of course, James Brown was a singer, but a lot of his music, um, if you go back and listen to it, he was talking over the beats. I mean, it was some singing and songs, but it was talking over the beat. Even the song like "I'm Black and I'm Proud," is an example of these chants, and you know, it had that feel, that call and response that will go on to become rap as we know it today. So although the culture, hip hop culture, has its origins on the continent of Africa, so do all the other genres of music that led to the evolution that became rap music as we know it today. And when we
Okay.
talk about, one other thing, when we talk about it, it's again, the full circle moments, with hip hop culture being an international culture. There are thriving rap scenes on pretty much every continent. And interestingly, the continent of Africa and several countries on the continent have rap scenes that are truly taken off. And now Afro beats have become the norm in American rap music. So the Afrobeat type sound is what is popular in American rap music. So, you know, again, it's you know, just how the circle of life goes, where, you know, the influence continues to go around. And with this global culture that we have now, you know, you could just see how the influence of Africa is still there in this modern time as well.
Okay, one more question for you that has come through. We've seen how technology has really changed the sound of music especially in recent years. So is there any way to project what might come next in regard to the evolution of hip hop music as technology continues to change how we listen to music and how it sounds?
Hmm. You know, I think that that with the new technology, it's allowing people to make music easier. It's a lot, and that's, you know, across genres. It's easier to just create music now. But I think that that people will be able to just play with sounds in different ways, and that's why that question about like how we define what hip hop is so interesting to me, because I think it will be even harder to keep hip hop or rap music in a box. There are sounds and beats, and I've seen people use even classical type music, but they're able to put that hip hop feel on it, and it makes it hip hop. And so I think that there's no limits, and you know, again, with the technology, it could even just be bringing people together to allow them to create music together that makes the difference. Again, I'm just excited about what we're seeing globally, and how we're able to connect the cultures. I think that that will have a lot to do with the next phase of rap music and the next phase of hip hop. It's not going to be so American focused. Of course, this is the birthplace of hip hop, but because it's so thriving in other places, that's going to begin to influence us, as it already has started doing. There is an organization called Hip Hop Generation Global, and Hip Hop Generation Global brings people together from countries all over the world in the spirit of hip hop. And so all the elements, all the aspects of hip hop culture, but really using it as a tool of liberation and a tool of social justice. So just seeing the work that they're doing is exciting. And so I see how that will continue to influence the arts as well. So we just got to keep watching to see what's next.
Do you happen to know off the top of your head any non-American hip hop artists that we might want to put on our playlists?
I would say listen to Burna Boy. I believe he is from Nigeria. He's a really good artist. Um, and I'm trying to think. Oh my goodness. It is a lady out of London, and I'm trying to think. And her name, Stefflon Don. Stefflon Don is a female MC, and she's out of London, and she has popped up on a lot of features here in the states. But artists overseas are starting to gain popularity. I would even say if you go to Hip Hop Generation Global, go to their website. Um, you may or may not know, but like MTV, you know, all the channels we have, MTV and, you know, whatever we have on cable, they have that version in other countries. And so their MTV Awards, I think in Uganda are coming up. So they're featuring a lot of the artists on that Hip Hop Generation Global website. So there's all kind of artists on there, people representing various elements of hip hop culture.
Okay, Dr. Winfrey, we are nearing the end of our hour, so I want to take this last opportunity to thank you very much for spending your time with us this evening, for all of your expertise and your insight. I want to thank Dr. Janice Cruz and the Center of Excellence for Creative Arts at Austin Peay State University for supporting this event and for taking care of all of the behind the scenes typing and logistics for the evening. So thanks again for joining us, everybody, and be sure to come to our next events when we're actually able to have them in person.
Thank you.